Hello everyone, I'm Sidhvita, a member of Krino Forensics, welcoming you all to another video. Before we begin, just think about this. In any crime, what actually speaks the truth? It's not the criminal, not even the witness, it is the evidence. So, in today's session, we will understand evidence in forensic science in very clear and structured way. So, first, let's understand what exactly evidence means. In simple terms, evidence is anything that helps to establish the facts of the crime. But just having evidence is not enough. For it to be accepted in court, it must be legally obtained, scientifically analyzed, and properly documented and preserved. Now, here is something very important. Even if one of these steps is missing, the evidence can be rejected. So, clearly handling evidence is just as important as finding it. Now, let's move forward and look at its different types. Let's begin with one of the most basic and important types, physical evidence. Physical evidence refers to anything that can actually see, touch, or measure. For example, weapons, bloodstains, hair, fibers, soil, or even paint. Now, what makes physical evidence so powerful is that it's objective. It doesn't lie, it doesn't forget, it doesn't get influenced like human memory. However, it is a catch. It is time sensitive, which means if not collected properly or quickly, it can be lost. So, this brings us to an important question. Why is physical evidence is so important in investigations? Well, physical evidence plays a major role in solving crimes. It helps in connecting a suspect to the crime scene, reconstructing what exactly happened, and even verifying or contradicting witness statements. For example, bloodstain pattern can tell us the position of victim during the attack. So you can see evidence doesn't just exist, it tells a story. Now, moving ahead, let's talk about another powerful type of evidence, biological evidence. Biological evidence comes from living organisms. This includes blood, semen, saliva, sweat, hair, skin cells, bones, and tissues. Now, what makes this type of evidence extremely important is DNA. And that brings us to the next concept, DNA. DNA is often called the golden standard in forensic science, and there is a reason for it. Even a tiny biological sample can identify a suspect with high accuracy, prove someone innocent, or even identify victims in disasters. But at the same time, biological evidence is very delicate. It can easily get degraded due to heat, moisture, or improper handling. So, proper collection becomes very crucial. Now, from biological evidence, let's move to something much smaller but equally powerful, the trace evidence. Now, let's talk about trace evidence. These are tiny materials that transfer from two objects come into contact. This is explained by a very famous principle in forensic science, low-card exchange principle, which states that every contact leaves a trace. So even something small as a fiber, hair strand, or paint chip can connect a suspect to a crime scene. So remember, even the smallest evidence can make the biggest impact. Now moving from microscopic traces, let's shift to written proof. Documentary evidence, which includes written or printed materials. This can be things like suicide notes, contracts, checks, or even emails and messages. Now, forensic experts don't just read these documents, they analyze handwriting, signatures, ink, and even paper composition. Because even a small inconsistency can reveal a forgery or fraud. Now, as crimes evolve, evidence has also evolved, especially in digital world. In today's time, digital evidence has become extremely important. It comes from mobile phones, laptops, emails, social media, CCTV, and GPS data. Now, this type of evidence helps investigators to track locations, establish timelines, and understand communication patterns. But here is the challenge. Digital evidence is very fragile and can be easily altered. That's why special forensic techniques are used to preserve its integrity. Now, moving ahead, let's look at the evidence based on patterns. Pattern evidence is formed when an object leaves an impression. This includes fingerprints, footprints, tire marks, and tool marks. Among these, fingerprints are one of the most reliable methods of identification because no two individuals, even twins, have identical fingerprints. So, pattern evidence helps us to identify individuals and reconstruct events. And closely related to this is impression evidence. Impression evidence includes marks left on surfaces, for example, footprints in mud or tire marks on roads. These impressions can reveal the size and type of footwear, the direction of movement, and even force used. So, again, evidence is not just collected, it is interpreted. Now, let's move to another important category, toxicological evidence. Toxicological evidence deals with poisons, drugs, and alcohol. Samples like blood, urine, or tissues are analyzed. This helps to answer critical questions like what substance was present, in what amount, and did it cause death? This type of evidence is especially important in poisoning and overdose cases. Now, not all evidence directly proves something. Some works indirectly. Circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence does not directly prove a fact. Instead, it helps us to make logical connections. For example, the presence at a crime scene or a suspicious behavior. Individuals may seem weak, but when multiple pieces comes together, it becomes very strong. Now, let's talk about human-based evidence. Testimonial evidence includes testaments given by witness or victims. But human memory is not always reliable. It can be affected by stress, fear, or time. That's why testimonial evidence is always stronger when supported by scientific evidence. Now let's look at type of evidence that disappears quickly. Transient evidence is temporary. Examples include smell, body temperature, wet blood, or smoke. This type of evidence must be recorded immediately before it disappears, which shows how important timing is in forensic investigation. As we have understood different types of evidences, let's move to understand how evidence is handled. Collection of evidence must be done very carefully. First, the crime scene is secured, then documented, and then evidence is collected using proper tools. It is important to avoid contamination and label everything properly because one mistake here can affect the entire case. Now, after collection, what happens next? Evidence must be preserved correctly. Different types of evidences require different storage methods. For example, biological samples in paper bags, sharp objects in rigid containers, and digital evidence in antiseptic bags. Improper storage can destroy evidence completely. So, now after preservation, evidence must be submitted. Submission involves sending evidence to forensic lab. This includes proper sealing, labeling, and documentation. A forwarding letter is also included to specify the case details, but the most important and critical part here is something called chain of custody. Chain of custody is the record of events from collection to court. It ensures that evidence has not been tampered with. Even a small gap in the record can make evidence invalid. So, documentation is extremely important. Now, finally, let's see how all this evidence is used together. Crime scene reconstruction, which helps us to understand what actually happened. It answers what happened, how it happened, and in what sequence. It uses all the types of evidences together and helps to build a complete story of the crime. So, to conclude, evidence is the silent witness that speaks the truth, no matter how small or large. Every piece matters. As a forensic scientist, our responsibility is to collect, preserve, and interpret it correctly because justice depends on it. Thank you for watching. I hope you find this lecture helpful and easy to understand. In case if you have any doubts or want us to explain any forensic topics, please comment below so we will cover them in future forensic videos. And the presentation document will be shared on our social media channels. You can access it from there. Stay tuned to learn with Krino Forensics to explore the world of forensic science. Thank you.